Hello and welcome to the Soulful Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Lucina Stepanyan. The purpose of this podcast is to get into the mind and the soul of entrepreneurs and to peek into the inner processes that result in multimillion-dollar enterprises. You can treat this podcast as a mini therapy session with entrepreneurs to learn about their brilliant mind and soul. Today's guest is someone who has successfully reinvented himself a few times and managed to break the social, economic, and psychological bubbles that he found himself in during his life. It's an honor for me to have Vach Hovsepyan as the first guest on our podcast. Vach is a serial startup executive and co-founder. He started his career in retail banking, transitioned into management consulting, and finally found his passion in vertical SaaS. Vach was a senior VP at Service Titan, and in 2022, he co-founded Curbwaste, which is the first integrated software solution for waste and recycling haulers. Thank you so much for being with us today, Vach.
Great to be here, Sean. Thank you for having me.
So prior to this call, we had a very soulful conversation. And I think one thing that I took from this conversation was that your life can be divided into sort of crucibles or turning points that happened to you at one point or another. And I think the first crucible was when you first moved to the US from Armenia. Can you take a minute, look back and share what was this transition like and what was this experience like for you as an 18-year-old who recently moved to the US?
Yeah, happily. Look, maybe start off with my life in Armenia. First off, I had an amazing life in Armenia. I had a very loving family, grew up with 3 sisters, had the absolute privilege of going to what was then, I think, one of the first private magnet high schools in Armenia, Armenia, and was surrounded by people who truly showed me, friendship, love, challenged me intellectually and in many different ways. And that made the transition that much harder because I went from essentially having an incredible life where full of, all pockets were full in terms of even my friendships. I had circles of friendships in almost every area where, I had my like adventurous artsy friends with whom, I'd play the guitar, do hikes or explore nature. I had the intellectual friends who would have like deep philosophical discussions at 17, 16. I had my kind of, childhood friends who I grew up with, kind of the tough streets of Yerevan. So I had, and I actually started working too in Armenia pretty early. I think it was like 17. So I was making money. So I had a very good life, right? So then I get basically parachuted into LA. I moved here with my family. We were very fortunate to have relatives here who took really good care of us. But for me personally, it was an extremely difficult transition because I felt like my life just got completely upside down. I got disconnected from kind of the root of my energy, my soul, and I struggled with it a lot. My first year was pretty miserable, to be honest. So I don't know the language, don't understand the culture, don't have a car, and don't have friends. Most importantly, it was really difficult. I have boxes of letters to this day that I wrote to my friends, and this is obviously pre-social media, and internet was pretty new back then, especially in Armenia. So it's very difficult for me to stay in touch. I remember I would like put together, $10 and then and then I would spend that on a calling card so I can call and talk to my friends. That period was pretty rough. But yeah, slowly I kind of started kind of immersing myself into the life here. I was very careful not to kind of stay in the, so to speak, the Glendale Armenian bubble. I'd put my mind already at that age, and even during that time, was constantly thinking about how I can kind of immerse myself into life here. And yeah, the turning point was about a year. I got my first job probably a few months in, 4 or 5 months in. It was pretty rough. It was like a factory. I had a night shift job. I was like a quality inspector. And my shift started at like 10 p.m. ended at 6:30 a.m. and my days off were like Tuesday, Wednesday or something. So, but I was so happy because it was not like an Armenian business. It wasn't a situation where I was kind of stuck in that bubble. Like the factory was in the middle of Hollywood in like the most kind of dirty area. And I remember my lunch break was at like 3 a.m. So I'd get out and try to like explore America. And it was very different from, kind of how you think about America before you come here. So that was kind of probably the first kind of breakthrough. And then a few months later, I was able to land a job at the bank, which kind of gave me a lot of prestige, if you will, which at that time was very important to me. I can't remember, I would put up my tie and go to work, and I felt really important. And so that was definitely the turning point. And then I started going to school as soon as I could, took a few English classes, and started to get a hang of kind of the university system here. And then I also happened to meet my now wife. Back then, we're just childhood friends. She left and moved here at a much younger age, and then we kind of reconnected, and so that helped a lot. So I started forming kind of this new group of friends that I could relate to, I could understand, and so that was a turning point. And fortunately, looking back, it just I got very lucky from there, and so life kind of fell into the rhythm and treated me very well. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I guess my question would be, as you were going through that transition period as the first year, did you talk to anyone about your emotional well-being? I guess in Armenia, and growing up in an Armenian household, I know how difficult it is to talk about your emotional challenges with your parents, because usually that's kind of swept under the rug and they're not considered real issues. But what kind of support did you seek, and did you get any support, family, friends, or whatnot?
yeah, it's a good question. My best outlet for that was probably my friends, but again, my only channel to communicate with them for the most part was letters. So that did help a lot. I have two older sisters with whom I'm very close, and we all moved together, so we live together. I think that was a really good channel for me as well. And my sisters I have a younger sister too, but obviously she's much younger than me. So in terms of that, at that age, it was difficult. But my older sisters, and they're both very different personality-wise, so I was able to kind of find some of that support through them. Not as much with my parents, honestly, because I felt like they have their own problems, and they did. But they were very supportive. So overall, I didn't feel like alone or anything of that sorts. But I think what I missed the most was obviously the home, the feeling of home of Yerevan, and my friends. That was a tough one. I couldn't really feel that with anything.
Yeah, of course. I've moved to the US for a year when I was 15, so I know the drill. I felt the same, exactly the same.
Yeah.
I guess on the topic of being Armenian, I wonder, how does that shape you today, or how being Armenian affected you as an entrepreneur, if it has, or growing up in an Armenian household? What values were you able to sustain that helped you in your entrepreneurial journey, or just in life?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like because I grew up in Armenia, I never thought of that as something that it was never kind of front of mind for me. It was kind of built in. But now looking back, I think it's more about the immigrant journey than specifically the Armenian journey that had the biggest impact to, say, my career or my entrepreneurship journey. On a personal side, obviously, being Armenian had a big role to play in kind of how I navigated my life here. And that's that kind of sense of purpose, or the sense of responsibility, that I think is unique to the Armenian experience. That definitely played a huge role and continues to play a huge role. And frankly, I'm very thankful for that. Although at times it could feel like a burden, for lack of a better word. But I'm grateful for it. I feel that if you harnessed it the right way, it could be an incredible competitive advantage, if you will, in life, both in career and personal life, frankly. And I think for the most part, I was able to channel it the right way. Although there have been ups and downs too on that front.
Yeah, interesting. Would you say that you felt this purpose and responsibility after you moved to the US, or did you always have this sense of feeling of I'm an Armenian, I have a sense of responsibility as you were in Armenia? Because I feel like people move and they tend to look back, and that's when they realize the sense of purpose and what being Armenian means.
No, I always felt it. I grew up in a household where my parents were very involved with kind of the movement of the freedom, kind of breaking up from the Soviet Union. I grew up hearing stories about my dad and my mom being rebels when they were younger, and from like the Soviet Union type thing. My dad had a lot of friends who were political prisoners during the Soviet Union time. So and then obviously the first war in the early 90s as I was a kid, but my dad was pretty involved. And so that sense of responsibility was always there, I would say. It certainly amplified when I moved here, certainly. And a lot of that was the feeling of guilt of having left Armenia, and especially being a man, and most of my friends were in the army during that time. So that was definitely a rough one. That sense of guilt of I've left, I've escaped essentially. I lived with that for quite a long time, and frankly, it still resonates with me, that sense of guilt. But again, you can channel that to feel bad about yourself, or you can channel it to say, well, I got to do more. If I'm feeling guilty for having left, or for not contributing to certain things, being on the ground, then that translates into a sense of responsibility for doing more with what you have.
Yeah, I was gonna actually say that you were able to transform this feeling of guilt or sense of guilt into something completely different, where you are able to actually contribute to the development of Armenia and Armenian nation. And can you speak a little bit about that, how you were able to transition from feeling guilty? I guess we all feel guilty all the time, not being in Armenia, not living there, but you were able to channel it in a way that would be productive for Armenia. How did you do that?
Yeah, it honestly, it just kind of came together. Like it was always in my mind. I remember even just moving here, and in the very early stages, I would always dream about um, becoming somebody important and going back and doing something. I didn't really know what it was. I mean, at the time, this is funny. At the time, Krikorian was like the biggest Armenian in terms of support and success, etc. So I would always like dream about like going back and being part of like the Krikorian entourage, and being able to like use my connections and do useful things. I had no idea what those things were. I had no idea how I was going to contribute. But that was always, I think some of that was that kind of the guilt. It was a mechanism to kind of shut down that guilt and think about more about the opportunities. But I had no idea how I was going to do it. And
Yeah.
then, luckily, as I went through my journey, opportunities kind of came along, and I was fortunate enough to and smart enough to be surrounded by good people who helped me with good advice and encouragement, starting with my wife and, close friends and family, I was able to kind of navigate through and to a certain extent be able to accomplish some of sort of those aspirational goals. But honestly, I don't feel like I've actually checked off that box, and I don't think I'll ever do. If anything, I kind of got a taste of it a little bit. And so now that sense of responsibility is even more heightened. And so there's no illusion in my head that like, oh, well, I did my part. And now, that's in the past. Not even close. If anything, again, it's more about, well, how can I do more and translate more now that kind of I've found some channels and I've had some successes with it.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's beautiful and at the same time powerful that people are able not to shun their emotions and to never think about their emotions or experience them, but to actually face the emotion, whether it be guilt or pain or whatnot, and then actually use it as something you learn from and are able to translate or transform it into something beautiful, which is what you did, I think. I guess I want to talk a bit about you breaking out of the first bubble, which is the Glendale community. How did you even recognize that you are in some kind of a bubble? Because it's like a fish in water, right? You can't really tell that you are in a bubble unless you are outside and you can see that there's fish in the water. How did you break out of that? How did you acknowledge the fact that you are in a bubble? And then what pushed you to get out of it? Because some people feel safer to be inside this little bubble where everyone knows each other and they speak the language and they're able to feel kind of safe.
Yeah. I think some of that had to do with my upbringing in Armenia, because frankly, I think that those bubbles exist in Armenia as well. Like I had a lot of friends that I grew up with in our building that kind of were stuck in that let's say the childhood friendship circles, and they never actually broke out of that. So they continue to associate and only interact with people that they grew up with and somewhat close environment. Whereas I got fortunate enough, like I mentioned, my parents kind of almost forced me in 8th grade to apply to this magnet school. And luckily I got in, and so I kind of broke out of that my initial circle, and I got to see like how amazing life can be when you kind of push yourself out of your comfort zone, right? So I think that was somewhat built in. And in terms of how I recognized it, I mean, it wasn't hard to recognize, honestly. Like it's pretty evident when you spend even just a little time in LA. You can see kind of these pockets of Armenians who feel more comfortable kind of staying in their own environment. That was never even an option for me, honestly. Like I didn't even consider that as something that it would be okay for me. But I think some of that was also connected. I can connect it back to this sense of purpose and responsibility. I think the two kind of went together. So I always had this aspiration of, kind of maximizing my opportunities here. And in order to do that, and I don't just mean making money, right? Because you can stay in the Armenian bubble and be successful in terms of financial success. But in terms of success in the larger sense of just being successful in life, I didn't think that was an option. I wanted to understand the hierarchy of societies here, and I knew, and I wanted to push myself as high as I can get, and I knew that staying in the Armenian kind of bubble was going to be a limitation. So yeah, I wasn't really like, it's not like something I sat there and thought, hey, like I got to get out of this bubble, but it sort of happened naturally as I went through.
Yeah, it seems like there's this something that exists in you, plus probably the upbringing of your parents, right? Because I think parents condition their children a lot, either to stay within certain limits or to explore the opportunities that come their way. So I think that's really inspiring to see that what your parents were able to do. I guess as breaking out of that bubble, you've have experience in management consulting and you worked at JP Morgan and Chase and PwC for years. And I guess at the age of 24, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, you have even managed teams already of people. If you can go back to that experience and think about what were some of the lessons as such a young person in management who just recently moved to the States from Armenia, what were some of those growth lessons, opportunity lessons that you were able to extract that kind of stayed with you for life after that?
Yeah, good question. And yes, I did get, one of the benefits of being in retail. So I was in retail banking. Back then it was Washington Mutual Bank, and then it got acquired by Chase. But yeah, one of the big benefits in it being in retail banking was you have opportunities to manage people pretty early on in your career arc. And I mean, lessons learned very early on were just kind of the classical management early mistakes where for example, you think that the things that motivate you are going to motivate other people, and you apply you try to kind of motivate them the same way, and you expect that they're going to react the same way that you would, for example. Or another kind of classical management mistake is where you want to be liked, and you kind of go out of your way to make people like you, and that usually manifests itself in people taking advantage of you as a manager. So I certainly made those mistakes. I mean, from a learnings perspective, everything I've learned through those times, I've certainly applied as I've moved forward with my career. But yeah, those are kind of the two main ones that come to mind is how to motivate people or how to inspire people, which every person is different, right? And so understanding those intricacies was something that I encountered and learned. And then how to be an effective leader, and how being liked is actually pretty low on the list of things that you need to do to be able to be an effective manager or leader. Whereas back then for me that was sort of intuitively number one, because I wanted to make sure that I was liked as a manager.
Yeah, it sounds like those were all lessons of emotional intelligence, I guess, and I think you've developed it quite well throughout your career. Would you be able to help us maybe define emotional intelligence, how you see it, or what it is, and then also how were you able to build emotional intelligence? Is it something that innately, since you were much younger, you had that, or is it something you had to really think about and develop? Because skills don't always come easily unless it's something that kind of is ingrained in your personality or your character or your architecture.
Look, in terms of defining it, I mean, for me, it comes down to people, right? Like knowing how to interact with people, knowing how to inspire people, knowing how to understand how each person operates, what motivates them, etc. And then knowing how to bring people together. To me, emotional intelligence has a lot to do with kind of calibrating and collaborating with people in a way that 1 + 1 = more than 2 type thing, right? Like, so I think the best leaders are the ones that are able to make people around them better than they actually think they can be, right? And I think a lot of that is pure emotional intelligence. In terms of my own journey and growth on that front, I think it's a combination. I think there's some natural abilities that people have, just like with IQ, right? Like some people are just smarter. Their brain works in a way that they can solve problems, let's say technical problems or math problems. They can do it faster, whereas for others it'll take a little bit longer. And emotional intelligence, I think, is similar. Some of it is kind of who you are. It's part of your core. That's what you're born with. But it all comes down to how you cultivate that, right? Like and how much effort you put into to make your strength play a bigger role in the things that you do. I think that's one of the things that I started figuring out probably a little bit later in my life, probably post grad school, where I started realizing that I'm best off to identify the things I'm really good at and kind of doubling down on them versus try and make up for things that maybe don't come as naturally to me. And so as soon as kind of that light bulb went on in my head, I definitely doubled down on the emotional intelligence piece, and that served me really, really well and continues to serve me well.
Mm-hmm. It seems like from what you're saying, self-awareness has really been a part of your journey quite a bit. Were you always this self-aware, or in some cases, in some spiritual science, they say pain always leads to observation, and self-observation leads to self-awareness. Would you say that you were always self-aware and understanding, oh, these are my strengths and these are my weaknesses, and as a human being, I need to cultivate these certain characteristics to succeed in life? Or was this something that you've realized after the painful experiences, I'm not saying painful is tragic, but painful in terms of emotionally painful experiences?
Yeah, definitely the latter. It wasn't like, at 18, I was like, yeah, I'm really good at emotional intelligence. Actually, no, I mean, I tried different things. And I felt at certain things, and that kind of helped me figure out, well, okay, maybe this doesn't come as naturally to me. Maybe I should look at other things. Like, for example, both my mom and my dad have a technical background. My dad is a physicist. My mom studied math in college. So my dad, he actually, I'm still shocked at how kind of visionary he was for that time, but he clearly saw technology as being kind of the future. And this is like in the early 2000s. So he tried to help me kind of guide me through that, kind of shape my journey in a way that it would take me through like a technical path. I remember I took a computer science class in college, and I was pretty excited about it because I was like, yeah, this, it makes sense. My parents have technical degrees. I should be pretty smart. I graduated from, again, really good technical school, high school in Armenia. But then, I remember like halfway through that class, I was just like, I wasn't enjoying it. Like, it wasn't something that came easily to me, and it wasn't something that I enjoyed doing. And so I had to stop and think like, okay, well, just because my dad thinks that this would be a good path for me, maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be. And funny enough, I obviously came full circle and ended up in technology world. I think everything that my parents tried to kind of guide me through eventually landed, but in a different way, right? And I think it's important to kind of pave your own path in that sense.
Yeah.
That most people that I know that kind of follow the path that somebody else tries to draw out for them, they don't end up being fulfilled in life. And for me, it was just like it had to be my thing. It was just kind of a natural thing for me. In terms of figuring it out, it was a lot of trial and error. But I kind of believed that I'm going to figure it out. And there were times where I was confused, for sure. I remember even in grad school, when I started grad school, I had no idea what I wanted to do eventually.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of figure it out. I remember one of the things that happened that was very encouraging, actually, was orientation for grad school. One of the professors asked, like, how many are here? How many people are here who are trying to do a career pivot or don't really know what they want to do? And I was kind of like very reluctant to raise my hand because I was thinking I'm probably the only one. And then sure enough, like more than half the class raised their hand. I was like, oh, nice. Like I'm not alone here.
Yeah.
Like, this is nice. And at this point, I'm pretty late in my career. I started in 2008, so I'm 27 at this point. I already have a kid, a family. So it's like it could be kind of discouraging to think that like, oh, you still don't know what you want to do. But yeah, I kind of just always kept exploring and kept trying to find sort of the things that I was good at, and yeah, eventually it kind of all found place.
But that's beautiful. And you mentioned you always believed that it's going to work out one way or another. And I think that it's important for people to cultivate that self-belief. And I want to know, what was this belief for you? Was it believe in God, believe in yourself, believe in your strength and abilities, believe that you can always rely on your parents, or I don't know, what was that for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't honestly, I don't know. I never thought about it really. It definitely, I'm not a big religious person. I do believe that there's something divine, but I'm not, particularly religious. So it's definitely wasn't that. Family values. I think probably the strongest. Like failure was just not an option for me. Like I always believed that I was going to be successful. Um, it also had a lot to do with people around me kind of believing in me. Starting with my parents, my sisters, they always encouraged me, my friends. And I did experience some success earlier on in life, and I think that helped kind of build my confidence as I went. Um, that's not to say that I didn't question from time to time. There's always that kind of devil in you that says like, well, you're going to fail and it's going to be embarrassing and this and that. But for the most part, I felt very supported. And like I said, I met my wife at a very young age, and she always believed in me, and she was very accomplished. When I met her, she was top student at UCLA, and she had this really successful journey there. She always believed in me, so I think that definitely helped. Um, but yeah, even as a kid, I always felt like I can do things and I can be successful. I think it can be traced back to my parents and my upbringing. Ultimately, I think a lot of that is rooted in that. One way or another, you go back, and you go back far enough, you're gonna get to that point, I think. And so for me,
Yeah,
that definitely played a big role.
yeah. That's great. And I think as you were speaking, I was thinking of the poem by Henley, which says, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And I think like that really stands out to me as you speak, because you really believe in something deeper. It is the support and relationships. Those are all important. But as a kid, if you start cultivating that sense of I can do anything, doesn't matter, challenges are here to teach us, then as you grow older, you're able to overcome them better and better. I guess my next question is, you were the SVP of customer success at Service Titan, and this is a role that kind of means that you will have highly developed, obviously emotional intelligence, but also empathy. Can you speak a bit about that? How important is empathy in a role like that? And was that something that you were thinking about as you were taking on this position? Because it kind of naturally, you got into the space and you were able to develop all of this skills and emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely has a huge role. It plays a huge role, empathy in any customer facing role.
Hmm.
I think it plays a huge role, for sure. Frankly, it was pretty easy at Service Titan, and I have to credit Vaha and Ara for this, because it was kind of built in, right? So if you think about it, Vaha and Ara built Service Titan to first serve their parents, right? And when I started, Vaha's dad was a customer.
Hmm.
He was a customer for at least through my journey there, and so it wasn't hard to relate, right? And I used to tell when we would hire new support agents, I would tell them, hey, next time that phone rings and you answer or chat comes in, it could be Vaha's dad, and he seriously did reach out to support from time to time, and
Hmm.
so. So it was really easy for me to make that connection, the empathy. But I think some of that was I also learned in banking earlier on, because you're dealing with people's money, and sometimes that could be very emotional for people.
Yeah.
And I think it was natural for me too. I didn't have to try hard. Like it was pretty easy for me to connect with people and connect to their emotions. Um, and the other thing is, at ServiceTitan, vast majority of our customers were real hardworking people.
Yeah.
Most of them built their businesses kind of on their backs, and that's all they had for most people, right? Like they didn't have a plan B. Most of
Yeah.
those business owners didn't have a 401k or a mutual fund or anything that could, fall back on. So I think it was also easy to connect to them because of kind of the immigrant journey, because like you understand these people are passionate because that's all they have, and they've poured their entire lives. And in certain cases, it was a generational thing. It would just, a business was passed on from father to a son or grandfather to the dad, and there was just a lot of emotional connection, and that resonated with me. So it was pretty easy, honestly. Where it got harder was to try and instill that in everybody that was around me. So I started with a pretty small team, but then sure enough, and very quickly, the team size started growing, and when I was able at the times where I was able to kind of have a personal relationship with everyone on the team, that was a lot easier. It was a lot easier to make sure that kind of core culture stays in, and the emotional connection to our customers and empathy was there. But as we got bigger, it definitely got harder, because then you've got layers, and trickling down all the way is definitely difficult. But again, it was the company culture had the empathy piece in its core, and so it was easy to build on that. If I was dealing with founders who themselves didn't have that
Yeah.
empathy or that connection, I imagine it would have been a lot harder. So I had a pretty easy go at it because of Vach and Ara, and not just because they built this originally for their parents, but because of who they are too, and this feeling the customer pain.
Yeah.
And I'm intentionally using the word feeling, because it's not just recognizing or understanding, it's actually feeling. Like when your customer is in pain, it has to hurt. You have to feel the pain.
Yeah.
That's the only way to feel empathetic. Because if you just think of that as dollar signs and impact to your business, you're never going to get to the point where the person in front of you, your customer, feels that you actually can connect. And RN
Yeah.
Vibe incredibly well.
Yeah, I guess it's very difficult to actually build a system within a large organization that kind of incorporates empathy at all the levels. But I think you're right. The fish rots from the head. So if the management does not really believe in empathy and they're not empathetic, then it's going to trickle down. And then vice versa. If they have that as a core, as a value, as an authentic value, then it usually trickles down. But then again, there are just challenges, because it doesn't always, it's harder to reach like all of the levels of.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, in certain departments, it's also harder than others, right? Like customer success, you usually attract and hire people who kind of have that empathy kind of built in, right? But there's other departments like sales, for example. It's very difficult to find salespeople who are driven and motivated by empathy. And a salesperson who's driven and motivated by empathy is probably not going to be a great salesperson. So it's important to try and strike that balance across the organization, but do it in a way that also allows each department to kind of have its own little autonomy when it comes to like kind of how they operate. But that core of actually caring absolutely has to be there. And I fought many battles at ServiceTitan, because being kind of the voice of the customer around the table the management executive table, et cetera, comes with additional responsibility to make sure that that empathy can be felt across the board, not just in customer success. Because if you have a company where that empathy only exists in customer success, you're going to be doomed to fail. But it also, you can't expect to have that same empathy in other areas of the business, but you got to make sure that there's enough to where, it stays core to the company's DNA, if you will. And again, going back to the importance of founders and how they operate, it was pretty natural for me, and it was relatively easy to do that at ServiceTitan because of Vach and Ara and how they operated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I'm hearing is it took a lot of one-on-one training as well, talking to specific people in training, and whether it be in sales or customer success people, and then also choosing the right people and making sure that you're screening the people correctly, people who already have innately this empathy, customer-centric approach or whatnot. So yeah, that's really important, I think. Let's shift the gears and talk a bit about 2022 when you founded Curbwaste, which is also in itself a pivot, I guess, into waste management. How did you make this pivot? How did you decide to make this pivot? What moved you to take this step further?
Yeah. So look, first off, I'm what you would consider a late stage co-founder. So when I joined as a co-founder, the company already existed. We already had a product. We already had some customers.
Mm-hmm.
So this wasn't like I wasn't part of the incubation of Curbwaste. It already existed. That's an important clarification there. But in terms of how I found Curbwaste and why waste management, et cetera, that actually kind of happened by chance. So at some point through my ServiceTitan journey, I built a relationship with some of our investors, and because I kind of had developed this specialization around customer success, many of them, when they invested in new companies, they would kind of put me in touch with the founders to just brainstorm, advise, whatever, right? So that's actually how I met Mike, the founder of Curbwaste. And so first I got introduced to him through an investor that I knew through ServiceTitan, who was the first investor in Curbwaste. And so our relationship kind of started off as kind of an advisor role for me. And so we had a couple of conversations, and I saw a lot of parallels actually to ServiceTitan. And I saw a lot of parallels in Mike and in Ara. Interestingly, because that role of a CEO is incredibly important. And I remember even after the first conversation, I got off and I was like, wow, it's rare to meet somebody like that reminds me of Ara, because Ara is a very unique personality, and very unique to that founder CEO personality. And so I saw that in Mike, and so that was a big part of the decision to kind of get involved with Curbwaste, first as an advisor, and then later on as a co-founder. But waste management was just honestly, I myself did not have any connection to the industry, but Mike, he actually does. He's a third generation waste hauler. So the stories I told you about, like some of our customers that service that, and Mike had a very similar journey where he kind of grew up in waste management. His dad had a waste management business. His grandfather started a waste management business. And so that emotional connection, that empathy was kind of built in. So that was very easy for me to connect to because I had already seen that at ServiceTitan. And then as I learned more about the industry, I saw a lot of, again, similarities to people in home services industries, which is what we served at ServiceTitan. And so for me, again, it was very easy to connect, even though I knew nothing about the industry, but conceptually it was very similar in terms of people starting their businesses and putting their heart and soul into it, and that being the only thing they have, et cetera, et cetera. So it was very easy to connect. So yeah, I would credit a lot of that kind of back to that. But in terms of my personal evolution. This was probably one of the biggest turning points in my career. If I kind of trace it back to when I joined ServiceTitan, that was definitely a big shift. Because prior to that, I was all kind of corporate ladder, up type of mentality, and ServiceTitan was completely different from that. But at ServiceTitan, I kind of always make this analogy of a car. Like when I joined ServiceTitan, I was in the backseat, right? And ServiceTitan was a little car when I joined. And then, it became a bigger car. And, I kind of held my position in the backseat. And then it became a bus, and I was still in the backseat. And then it became an airplane, then a rocket, however you want to do that analogy, right? But I was always very close to the driver or the pilot, but I wasn't in the driver's seat or the co-pilot seat. I was always in the back seat. And I think through that journey, I finally kind of built up enough courage to say, well, I can be in the passenger seat, and I can bring a lot of value by being in the passenger seat, and I can be challenged and grow being in the passenger seat, because I had an opportunity to have a similar seat that I had at ServiceTitan, and I had an opportunity to do that at many other companies. In fact, I had offers that were far more attractive in terms of let's say compensation, at least in terms of cash compensation. But that wasn't as exciting for me anymore, because I felt like, okay, well, kind of been there, done that type thing. Whereas this was completely different. It was a completely uncharted territory for me. And looking back, hands down, one of the best decisions I've made career-wise.
Interesting. I guess my question will be, in a deeper sense or purpose, entrepreneurship is basically, or an entrepreneur does two things. One, they create value and solve problem for a group of people. And then two, as an entrepreneur, this is a challenge to you to personally grow and to develop and, as you said, cultivate certain characteristics and skill set, mentality, kind of completely restructure yourself to be effective in this position. What would you say were some of the qualities or characteristics or skills that you had to develop when you joined and became a co-founder at Curbwaste?
Yeah, frankly, I'm still on that journey. I don't feel like I've like kind of accomplished becoming an effective co-founder. I'm very much still in that journey, but I've grown a lot over the last couple of years. Biggest shift was kind of that mentality of owning a piece of the operation, or being responsible for a piece of the operation, and somewhat trying to figure out how that fits into the bigger picture and making sure that it fits nicely, versus actually feeling the ownership across the board, right? Like at ServiceTitan, it was very clear I own customer success, right? And I cared about the other parts of the business. Like if sales wasn't performing, I cared about it. But I didn't think of that as my problem that I had to solve, right? Or if we were late and shipping a feature, that impacted me, obviously, because I had customers who were waiting for that, or struggling with not having the functionality or whatever. So I could certainly relate, but I didn't feel the need to go in there and fix it, because I felt like there are other people who are responsible for that. Right, that feeling is very different at Curbwaste, because every problem is my problem. And so that transition, I remember the first few months, it was pretty difficult for me to kind of like not have a piece that I own, but rather have this feeling of like, well, everything is my problem. I got to figure out everything. I have to react to any problem in the business the same way I would react if this was specifically in my area, right? So that was a pretty hard transition, I think. And Mike, to his credit, my co-founder who started Curbwaste, he certainly helped me in that journey, because he's been an entrepreneur all his life, pretty much. So that comes very naturally to him. Whereas for me, it was it was an adjustment. That's one. And then the other thing, funny story. So we're at my parents' house and we're talking about health insurance.
Mhm.
And throughout my life, I've always, worked for good companies. I've always had good health insurance. And so my wife was always, and the kids were always part of my health insurance package, right? And then for the first time in my life with Curbwaste, I actually joined my wife's health insurance. And so that topic came up somehow. And one of my sisters was like, "Oh, does," and my wife works for USC for a university here in Southern California. And she was like, "Oh, is that a better? Do they offer a better health insurance?" I was like, "Actually, I'm not even sure if it's better than what we offer, but it doesn't cost the company anything." And so it's that shift of being an employee versus being an owner, right? It's like, because I see the balance sheet now, like I feel responsible for how much money we have in the bank, and everything that takes money away from that is less, it leaves us with less money to invest in other things, right? So that mindset shift is probably the biggest thing that I've been going through, and it's honestly,
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think it's like the heightened sense of responsibility. You also feel very stressed, especially at the start when you just join or start a company. But then at some point, you can't live without it. It just becomes like a drug because
Yeah.
the moment you leave it, you're like, well, what am I responsible for? Okay, I've had all of this aspects of my life, but then I was creating something amazing and I was responsible for literally everything. Now it's taken away from me. What am I left with? What am I doing with my life? I was a small business owner back in Armenia, and I remember the toilet was broken and I had to go fix it.
Mhm.
Even though we had to wait for a plumber to come in, I was like, okay, well, wait, I'm just gonna go fix it. And I remember every single word of an employee, of a customer, a problem would affect me. So I really feel like this heightened sense of responsibility. It's like a drug, which kind of gives you a bit of sense of pain and pleasure at the same time. Which is
Fulfillment. I think it gives you fulfillment that is very difficult to replicate anywhere else. And look, I
yeah,
think I think I can say the same thing about being in a startup, right? It is kind of rejuvenating, this like sense of pride in what you do, or the impact that you make. It is also similarly kind of infectious. But entrepreneurship, like true ownership, is another level of that, to your point, comes with a lot more responsibility and a lot of pain. But
yeah.
it also, on the flip side of it, the reward and the fulfillment is also much bigger. So it's that transition. But yeah, I can certainly relate to that, and I'll have a very hard time seeing myself as an employee at this point, anywhere, throughout my life. Like it would be very difficult for me to even just comprehend not being, you know, not having that kind of thought responsibility in anything I do. So it's very uh liberating in that sense, and very fulfilling.
Yeah, I think it kind of mimics the life when you are very conscious and feel alive all the time, which doesn't really happen in our normal everyday life. But that's when how entrepreneurship feels like when you're alive, things you have to be aware and also cautious all the time and awake all the time. I think that's what it mimics a little bit. I want to touch base on something you mentioned in a different interview. You said startup is a philosophy, not a stage. Do you still agree with this statement? I think this was maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago that you said this. Do you still agree with this? And does this still hold for you?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's harder again to keep that as you grow. But I think there's an interview that Steve Jobs gave a while back, where he says that Apple is the biggest startup, and this is obviously several years ago.
Mhm.
But yeah, I still believe in that. I don't see myself at any point not believing in that, because it truly is. It truly is, in the sense of speed, in the sense of innovation, sense of responsibility towards the people you're serving or the companies you're serving. Yeah, I mean, I'm even more convinced, if anything. This journey has cemented that opinion even more as I've gone through it.
Yeah. Interesting. Um, I wanted to pivot to something a bit more different. One thing that stood out to me throughout your entire journey, and I said this before as well, is your ability to redefine yourself and to kind of maybe shed skin and to change from one position to another and continuously to try to redefine yourself. Would you say that this was a conscious process that happened to you, or was it more of an impulse that you had? You just had this urge and feeling I have to move on because now I'm getting complacent, or I need to redefine myself. I need to prove something to someone, or what was that for you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's a combination. I think earlier on in my career, it was probably more of a need to, like you said, kind of impress people or, do things that I felt like um, were going to be viewed as big accomplishments. But as I've grown in my career and I've become more sort of comfortable with myself and with where I am, it's become more of a conscious decision because now I kind of don't have I have the luxury of being less concerned about what people think, right? And I mean, I still do. I think we all do, but definitely to a lesser extent. And uh, I can be more selective about what I do and be more cautious about how it affects me and my growth. And so I think it started being more as an unconscious thing, and then as it's moved on, it's become more conscious. I would say that's
Mhm.
probably the best way I can describe it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does because I had the same experience as well. But do you remember, are you conscious of what was that breaking point when you started being a bit more conscious about that? Because I remember in my early 20s until mid 20s, I was always for impressing people and I need to prove this person that I can do this. I'm better than them. And it always has been like that with me. And until at some point I realized I'm wasting my life doing that. So I need to completely change and be conscious about the decisions and the how I change. What do you remember? When was this for you? What was the point that it changed?
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint specifically, but probably if I look back, probably when Service Titan really started to kind of make it, right? Like I think maybe the Series C raise that kind of put us in a um, 1 billion plus valuation bucket um, is probably where I felt that I'm okay. The sense of accomplishment was where uh, I wasn't as cautious about, proving myself or impressing people or something of that sorts. But honestly, the center of it all was always the sense of purpose. That was
Mhm.
always kind of the main driving force. The rest kind of evolved as I went on, but that sense of purpose is still the main driving force. There's no question about it. Again, some of it has evolved over the years,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, if I were to try and pinpoint it, it'd probably be the point at which it became pretty clear that Service Titan is going to be a very successful company,
Mhm.
and I felt that you know the role that I played there sort of gave me that comfort and that confidence that I can just do like it's going to be fine. I'm going to make it no matter what, and I can still do the things that I want to do, and I can care less about like more comfortable with failure. Ultimately, is probably
Mhm.
the way to summarize it.
Mhm. Would you say you've become more of someone who would continue pushing themselves, or more complacent and like, oh, well, I've made it. It's a $1 billion
Oh,
company. What was
mm,
it?
nowhere even close to that. No, if anything, definitely more. I'm even more ambitious now. I'm even more. I feel like I haven't accomplished anything. The more I kind of go up in my career journey, the more um, responsibility I feel to do more and bigger and more impactful, etc. I think it will change. Like if like earlier on in my career, if the main motivator well, not the main, but like one of the main drivers, let's say, was money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just being really honest, like, that was a big motivator for me, right? I wanted to make sure that I can take care of my family, I can give my kids opportunities, I can be there for, my family, etc. That's becoming less, and I think the sense of purpose is becoming more important. So the things that I think about, like into the future, 5, 10 years from now, it's definitely much more focused on kind of the social impact, kind of the paying back type things versus creating wealth, let's just say. That said, like in terms of even just my entrepreneurship journey, I feel like I'm a baby in that sense. Like this is I don't feel like I've accomplished much, especially in my entrepreneurship journey. Like this is I feel like I've kind of uh, I'm reborn into this new world where I'm very much a beginner and
Yeah.
I have a lot to prove, and to myself first and foremost, and I have a lot to learn, and that's ultimately that's what gets me excited, gets me out of bed every day is that feeling of, man, there's so much more to do.
Mm-hmm. And this ties back to the word you use, which is rejuvenating. Being an entrepreneur and running a startup is rejuvenating. And it is true. As you are learning a lot, pushing yourself, you are becoming younger in a sense, not older. Because definition of old to me is not the wrinkles on your face, but more the fact that you've become set in your ways and unable to change. And with time, you become like a stone. Nothing can come through it. Like you don't accept anything new, you don't learn anything new. And that's the definition of old to me. So saying this, having this youthfulness and almost being like a child, and you mentioned that baby, it really resonates with me a lot. We'll come back to the sense of purpose in a bit as well, but I wanted to ask you, you have an MBA, right? Was this a necessary prerequisite for you now in your entrepreneurial journey, or what were some things that you did in your past and your experience that really contributed to you being a successful entrepreneur now?
Yeah, it's interesting. MBA definitely played a huge role for me, definitely. Uh, but it wasn't the actual education, although education definitely helped. But for me, doing my MBA was kind of one layer out of that bubble that we talked about earlier. Because like my first non-Armenian friend was somebody, I got to know at USA when I was doing my MBA. And the network, like just interacting with people from various different backgrounds, different professions, and actually going through that journey with them. And the program at USC was designed in a way where there were a lot of forcing functions in place for you to work with different people and do projects together. And we even traveled together internationally. So all of that kind of came together and definitely helped me grow as a person. And so, yes, the answer is yes. I don't see myself being able to, kind of maneuver through this career arc without the MBA. MBA played a huge role, for sure. But I know people who had a very different experience with an MBA. I have classmates who, probably looking back will be like, yeah, I don't know if it was worth it. Because obviously it's a lot of time. It's a big time commitment. It's expensive. So I don't think everyone will share that. But for me personally, it definitely played a huge role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And are there any other experiences in your life that you would say, okay, well, my time spent in this company or doing this specifically really contributed to me doing well in this
Yeah,
entrepreneurial journey?
absolutely. I think if I trace it back to every company that I've worked with or at, I have taken away certain things that I've been able to apply later. Like in banking, for example, we talked about the management experience that was super valuable for me. The emotional intelligence piece, like working with people, connecting and understanding what they go through, dealing with people like high stress situations where people are dealing with money and there's a lot of stress. So I took away a lot of that, and then I've applied all throughout my career. PwC was super helpful in that sense because I got to travel over US, so I got to learn a lot more about the culture Like if I look back pre and post PwC, I think that was that California bubble, if you will, or Southern
Yeah.
California bubble. So PwC helped me get out of that bubble, and I got to interact and work with people from all various different cultures. So that was huge. I definitely applied a lot of that at Service Titan. I still apply at Curbwaste. Um, uh, Operationally, PwC helped me from a process perspective. At PwC, obviously being a consulting firm or having a consulting arm was really masterful at having standardized templates, processes, ways of kind of fitting projects into already built out machines that would be very efficient. So a lot of that I took away from PwC, and I was able to apply at Service Titan as well. So yeah, absolutely. Every place I've worked at, I can pinpoint certain things and attribute to that experience that I was able to apply later.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It does seem to me like you've never had this idea of, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur in my life. It was more, like you said, a sense of purpose, but you really didn't have an exact idea of what it's going to be like. Is that correct?
No, that's absolutely correct. Yes, in fact, I don't think that by nature I am an entrepreneur. Like there are people, like even just in my kids, I have three daughters, and I can tell which one of them has kind of that entrepreneurship spirit, and it's only one of them, one out of three, right? At least right now, that's kind of the sense I'm getting. So yeah, that wasn't something that was like natural built in me, and that's probably partly why it took me that long through my career to feel kind of that comfort to, and still I'm not a founder, right? I'm not the driver. I'm the co-pilot or the passenger in the Curbwaste car, which hopefully will turn into a rocket ship. But yeah, that it wasn't something that came naturally to me. I didn't when I was a kid or even when I moved here, when I was thinking about and envisioning my future, I always saw myself as successful and important, but that was not necessarily paired up with being a business owner or an entrepreneur.
Right.
That wasn't something that was kind of built in, and yeah, I had to kind of like ease my way into that as I went
Would you,
through.
yeah, I think that's a good point. Would you agree that if you have, when you're a kid or when you're a young adult and you have a specific set goals, which are very narrow and exact, do you think that usually is helpful, or it may actually steer you away from other opportunities that
Well,
might be better for you?
I,
What is your stance on that?
I think it could be very limiting, right? Like I think because I don't know, especially if you're growing up in Armenia, let's say, or any other developing country, I think if you have a specific goal, you might just not have the imagination to have a big enough goal. So you might end up setting a low bar for yourself. Like for example, I know people who, let's say, came here and said, okay, I want to become an accountant and I want to have an accounting firm, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like that, you can be very successful. It could be very lucrative. But had that person thought, hey, I want to be, I don't know, the CFO of, the largest corporation or, whatever. Like if they had, much larger aspirations, that wasn't that narrowed out, they could have accomplished more. At least from my experience, I don't think having, narrow specific goals is necessarily the best thing. Now, that said, for some people, maybe it is, I don't know. For me, it definitely was helpful not to narrow myself in anything and just having this kind of bigger picture of being successful, being impactful, being important. Like those I had a very kind of broad idea of where I wanted to end up.
So you don't really put any limits to where you're going to end up, or yeah.
That's right.
I,
That's right. In fact, yeah, I try to think as big as I can, and even then, like comparing to my younger self to now, that's also changed a lot, right? Like, and I try to instill that in my kids now. It's very much don't put any limits on yourself. Like there's no, and I have to credit this again. A lot of it goes back to parents, right? And upbringing. Like, I remember my dad always told me, like, don't think anybody's smarter than you, or never think that you can't accomplish certain things that other people tell you you can't. And that was, I think, super impactful. And I just kind of saw that growing up. It wasn't just the words, right? I saw my parents reinventing themselves when they moved here, and going through those struggles, and but taking it head on and facing it, and evolving with it. And I think that's that's played a huge role in my journey.
I think it's an important point as well, because parents, out of fear, try to instill certain pathways into their children. Or, this is the best pathway for you. Go there, and this is what you need to do. Versus when a kid needs to actually learn about himself, who he is, what is his purpose in terms of, like, who am I, first of all? What are my characteristics? What are my strengths, my weaknesses? And it sounds like, to me, you've gone through that journey of being open-minded enough to, first of all, know a little bit every day about yourself, a bit more, learning through the process, and then taking on opportunities without limiting yourself to a specific, this is the pathway I'm going to go to, which resulted in something that where you can explore your potential to the fullest, as opposed to really put yourself in a job that might be smaller than you are. So, a lot of people fit themselves. I'm going to be an accountant, and they're bigger than that, but they fit themselves into this role, and they're never successful because they have so much more to give, but they want to just that narrow, tiny thing.
Yeah, totally. And I think you nailed it. I think it's the fear, right? Because as an immigrant, when you move here, you want to make sure your kids are secure, right? And there are certain paths that lead to certain security, right? Financial security. Like if you become a lawyer, or you become a doctor, certain things kind of come with it, right? Like certain financial stability. Now, obviously, there's exceptions, but like most people, most lawyers, make enough money to be comfortable, or most doctors, right? And so I think it's kind of seeing that path and saying, like, okay, well, it's a for sure thing. Let's not take any chances, right? And let's just like make sure like we lock this up, right? And I get it. And look, I think it has to be a balance. You can't. I don't think it's the right thing to tell your kids, like, hey, look, don't worry about money. Just go and search for your passion, and it's okay if you don't succeed. I don't think that's right either. Like somewhat there are two extremes, right? But I think it's important for the kids to understand the choices they make and kind of what that leads to, and the sacrifices and the trade-offs that all come with it, right? Like, I had this conversation with my daughter a few years ago, where she was like, yeah, and she's thoughtful. She knows, we're an immigrant family, and we have high expectations from ourselves and our kids, right? And she's feeling this as a kid, right? So one day she was like, well, what if I decide to become a school teacher? Like, how would you react to that? I was like, look, like, first of all, what's most important to me is that you be the best at what you do. So if you want to be a school teacher, my only ask would be that you be the best school teacher that you can be. That's one. Two, if you want to become a school teacher, no problem with me, but you got to understand that being a school teacher is going to equal to a certain lifestyle, right? Like, you can't expect to be a school teacher and live in a big comfortable home, right? Like, just something as simple as that. Like, if you want to become a school teacher, you have to understand and be okay with the fact that you're not going to be making a lot of money. And if you're okay with that, great, all power to you. If you feel that you're going to get so much fulfillment and satisfaction from being a school teacher that you're going to be okay living in an apartment and driving an old car, or not taking as many vacations or whatever, right? Then great, all power to you. Go become a school teacher. Just make sure you're the best at it, and make sure you have the right expectations. So I'm totally okay with. I genuinely am completely okay with it. But I think it's important for my kids to understand the trade-offs. Like you can't go become a school teacher and expect to have this lavish lifestyle. Like the tour, it just don't, they just don't line up, right? So I think it's
Yeah.
important to be honest, but it's also important to give them that freedom to just feel like, okay, well, yeah, if I do decide make this choice and I do understand the implications of it, then I can be supported and I can be okay with it. You know, it's important for kids not to feel like the parents are gonna feel like they're failures if they don't
Right.
make a lot of money. Like that, for me, that's never you know, kind of the important thing that I try to highlight.
Yeah, and I think that's beautiful. It kind of, you really need to know what the reality is and manage your expectations on this journey. And if you want to be wherever you want to be, it's fine as long as you know how to work with what the world is right now, not with what is in your head. What are your concepts and understanding and expectations of the world? So it's best to understand what it is, and I think that's a very healthy approach to parenting overall. I guess I have a couple questions left. And this one is a bit tricky, but I really wanted to hear your stance on this. If at some point you were stripped away from everything that you have right now, that is your job, your personal life, everything, no money, what are you left with? What can you say you're taking out of your experience, out of your journey so far? What are you left with? And I know it sounds a bit esoteric,
Yeah,
but
it's that's a bit depressing, honestly. Like especially on the personal life side,
yeah.
uh, you know, it's kind of difficult to
Let's put the personal
react to that. But
life aside for a second, and then just think about from a professional perspective for
oh
your
yeah, yeah.
entrepreneur.
Look, if we're just talking about the personal, like professional success, and if all
Mhm.
of a sudden, like tomorrow, I lose everything,
Yeah.
um, it definitely wouldn't. I mean, I would be disappointed, obviously, but it wouldn't break me. I think what I'll be left with is the same things that have gotten me here, which is purpose, uh, you know, work ethic, grit, drive, and I think it'll just be a matter of time before I build success again. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. Again, of course, I would be disappointed because I've worked pretty hard to get where I am, and I feel like there's so much more I can do. So it will be a huge setback if I were to lose everything. Um, when it comes to personal life and family, like it's just it's very difficult for me to envision what I would be left with if I were to lose, you know, the things that I've built on the personal side. I don't know. I would certainly hope that it won't break me, but um, yeah, the thought of losing, you know, family, is certainly, you know, it, yeah, it's a lot to handle. I don't know how I don't know what I would be left with. If I lose my family, I would be left with nothing.
Mhm. Yeah, it's why I'm asking is because we always think about what we have in a way that we don't really think who we are without it. And so sometimes it's a good idea to step away from the things that you have on the in the external world and try to look at things that are not transitory, things that are ultimately at some point you're not going to be an entrepreneur anymore, right? You're going to maybe retire at some point, and I don't know what with your life. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of success, but if you can think about what is left, and from what I'm hearing you say is the skill and the abilities. And similarly with family, I would say probably the ability to love is probably what's left
Yeah.
when you're stripped away of everything that you have, because we tend to identify ourselves with, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a founder, I am this, I am that. But in reality, these are just products of something that you've put into it, and
Mm.
it's not you. And what you put into it is not you either, but what you have created using your skills and talent is something that no one can take away from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So ultimately, yeah.
I think that's definitely like that kind of drive, grit, you know,
Mhm.
work ethic, like those things I feel like are kind of built in, that sense of purpose. I think it's built in. I
Mhm.
don't think that will go anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I just the personal side is to me, it just defines me, right? Like I am first and foremost like the son of my parents. I'm the brother of three sisters, and I'm the husband and the father. Right? That's what defines me. The rest, it's whether it's being the bank manager or the consultant or the SVP or the founder. Those are things that I think you just get along the way, and you utilize to grow and utilize to make an impact and to build. Those things I'm not afraid of losing, because again, I think at the core of it, that belief that I'm going to be successful is still there, and like I don't think that will go anywhere.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you said being the son of my parents, the husband of my wife, and the father of my children is what defines me. I think it also is what makes you Armenian, from my perspective, at least. I think that's the core of one of the Armenian values, one of the many beautiful Armenian values, which we don't value nowadays. And I think we need to kind of rethink that a little bit as well. But I want to stop here on this positive note and beauty of what you said. Thank you so much for your honesty, for everything you shared today. I know some of the questions might have been a bit too deep, but I appreciate you sharing and being honest and authentic.
Yeah, my pleasure, listening, John. Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope your listeners and viewers will find this helpful. And yeah, my pleasure, and best of luck to you.
Thank you so much.